one by one.
Right, the questions and the
Questions, no, questions will be on time. I said you guys will. I mean, first question will be there, and we can go.
Sure.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, and good afternoon from all around the world. We are happy to start our panel titled "Closing the Divide: Youth Bridging Gaps in Global Development." We have amazing panelists with us today. Marina Loza, Sian Skrader, Min in Miha Tran. Welcome everybody. I would like to start with introduction. Mia, why don't you start about your introduction and work that you are doing?
Okay, guys, I'm Mia Tran, and right now I'm studying economics at NYU. And my organization right now is UNIRA, and it's a UN international initiative for racial equality. And I also have co-founded my organization in Vietnam called Looking Tam, just like a youth-led platform where we express our awareness for mental health and also just like create like social identity like for Vietnamese adolescents and how they can like learn more about social like social engagement in general. So that's all for me.
Great. Sian.
Yeah, well, thank you, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Sean Schrader, based here in the United States. Fortunate to have just returned. I was at the World Expo serving as a U.S. Youth ambassador there for the last couple of months. It was a really great experience, especially when you think about multicultural cooperation. And fortunate to do a few different things relating to the UN. Serve right now as a Global Goals Ambassador for SDG 17 with the United Nations Association, and again, really believe in the power of local engagement to make such a difference.
Great. Marina.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you may be. I'm Marina. I'm currently working for the United States Senate. My previous experiences were with an international development NGO based in Fairfax, focusing in on the diaspora engagement alongside with just empowering orphans based in Egypt. I currently co-founded my I want to call it my baby organization, Veils of Grace, with my best friend, and we're just working on empowering young women as they're going through, going from developing into young adults as college graduates into their adult life as individuals entering society, either through becoming married or getting, just involved with their older as they're developing into young adults.
Great. Some of you may know about me, but let me introduce myself as well. I'm Sachin Chaudhary from India, and currently I'm serving as an Associate Vice President, and I'm also part of UNESCO Global Youth Community Paris. And working on SDGs and things that is needful to the society. Let's start with the first question. Maybe we can start with Sihan. From your perspective, what is the most significant divide or inequality holding back progress on the SDGs?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I've been fortunate over the last couple of months to travel a little bit around the world, as in Thailand, and then Budapest, meeting with different young leaders, trying to talk about different steps they can be taking to make a difference. And I'm a big fan of local action because I think that is a lot more measurable and accessible for individuals than it is to always have that global platform. I mean, if you look at it, for example, there's a lot of talk right now about reform within the United Nations. And I think it's an interesting discussion because you meet these people personally in different parts of the world that just do not have the resources, the access to be able to go to these types of events. And then by association, then you're really lacking then the up-to-date information and some of the skills and insights that are shared to be able to leverage change. And so I think if we can do a better job, in coalescing some different partners, I think, and it takes a lot of people, right? It takes government, nonprofit, private sector partners to believe in the investment of the SDGs, believe in that roadmap, to train individuals, especially at the community level. That makes such a big difference because, again, I think at the community level, that's the kind of stuff that you can tangibly see change from most directly. And I think then that helps to further show why it's important.
Yeah, I mean, you are like saying community-based development is needed to
Yes.
bridging the gap.
Yes.
Yeah, Marina, would you like to put more light on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Sean. In my opinion, I think the biggest thing that's holding back progress on the SDGs is the fact that the gap between developed and developing nations continues to widen. Wealthier nations continue to advance with their access to technology, their developed healthcare systems, their strong economies, while the poorer countries are still struggling with poverty, debt, and their weak infrastructure. And what makes it really concerning is the fact that the gap continues to widen year after year. We see it very clearly in the way healthcare and education opportunities differ depending on where you're born. And that's something that we can't control. So in some parts of the world, we have some children that have access to state-of-the-art facilities and others that can't even get their hands in a classroom or get their hands on a book. The millions of children that don't have the opportunities day after day are the pure reason why we're having a very difficult time for breaking these cycles of poverty. I think the best way to move forward is to decrease the creation of dependency by just sending aid. I agree with you. It needs to be locally led because when countries become more self-reliant and able to stand on their own 2 feet, they can actually empower the youth in their communities to make change and break this unending cycle of poverty.
Right. Min?
This is me, yes.
Yeah.
I actually fully agree on you actually about the developing and also developing nations. Because for me, right, like the most pressing divide right now is the divide power of like who have the right to make a decision or like who is actually being silenced here. Because for example, we often talk about like digital economics or like rural urban divides, but the root of everything here is all about representation. Because for example, I was taken into like maybe SDG 3, but mental health well-being like 55, and it's all about like program for women or like children are being cut or like mental health clinics are closing or like adolescent sexual reproductive health is also like collapsing for all the programs. And in a way, like in infected settings, we also see like how caregivers also face high risk of like gender-based violence or even like exploitation. And in a way, like at the end of all this, these girls' life are also like still tied into someone else's decision, like the agreement and like the policy itself. So when we talk about this, so I think like whether they will be able to have like safe from child marriage or like whether they like access to healthcare or abortion and whether we'll be free from gender-based violence. So the essence of all of this is about like the policies that written about women, but it's not with women or like this policy are talking about the marginalized community, but never with the marginalized. Or like, oh, this is talking about the youth, but never with the youth on the table. So I think that's the most like division that we have in the SDGs.
Yeah, I mean, having the right way representation is very important. People talks about indigenous community, but don't give the representation to the indigenous community people. People talk about the rural people, but the decision makers is someone who is sitting in the big places or maybe coming from the big universities and not giving them the representation time.
From like a developed country.
Yeah. So I mean, this type of things are there. But what kind of things we can do so we can bridge the gap? What are the things here we can make sure that this representation can come to the ground and it can be a decolonized?
Yeah. Well, I think, what everybody has mentioned is very important in identifying the problem. I think about the success then of skill building in being able to, kind of, showcase what's going on, particularly with certificate programs that can be offered to individuals, things you can do online. Of course, if you don't have, readily available access to the internet or to those programs, that can be a challenge. But I have found that is an effective tool and one that can bring about a bunch of different partners in that process to do those types of things. I also think that communicating the story is very important. What is happening in lesser developed countries and making others aware of how this is really a global effort, how it has to be a global effort. I think when you do that, you leverage skills like storytelling. It's not a thing that's going to solve it overnight, but I think that there are small steps there that move the needle a little bit. At least I've seen in my own work.
Yeah. Could you add something more on that, Marina?
To to kind of go off of that, I would say we must always incorporate the local folks within and empower these people in these communities, because at the end of the day, they know their challenges best and they hold the keys to solutions. They know what was going to work long term, because we need to take into consideration the cultural norms, the different diversity within this one specific community. So we need to be able to have eyes on ground from local folks. They need to be the ones that are managing these projects or these programs and monitoring it, not to dictate, but to kind of guide. And when we rely on the local folks, we empower them. We have youth involved, and we get to step back as outside actors while we're sure that this program is going to continue.
Yeah, I mean, inclusion and having the good amount of what we can say, we can be a background support, not the someone who is like imposing things on them. We can listen to them, they can listen to us, and together we can make progress.
Agreed.
Right?
Because I genuinely believe that development that is participatory is going to be the thing that's going to actually create the development. And when people feel that they're doing something together and it's not something that's being imposed upon them, it's going to be okay. We're going to work on it at the pace of the local folks that we're speaking of.
Great. Mia, would you like
I
to
think
share?
I fully agree with you actually, because for me, I feel like the problem here is not about expertise, but it's about like, how we're implementing like indigenous knowledge into it, or like maybe into like the cultural foresight we have into these kind of like actions. And the thing is like, we're putting all this like localized knowledge into like a program, and we actually need to like maybe support into like funding, or like maybe into like the tools or like the autonomy to actually lead. So I just want to add upon that, but honestly, I'm just really agree on that.
Right. We have one more panelist joining us right now. Ethan, welcome. Would you like to share about yourself first and your work?
Sure.
And, yeah.
Yeah, apologies for the late arrival. New York is a little less direct to get around than Texas, so I'll say that. But, late than never, right? My name's Ethan Barron, founder and CEO of a company called Create 3 Technologies, Texas-based, but really trying to decentralize and distribute a lot of manufacturing power, put it more in the hands of people, communities, and businesses that need a lot more. So UN pulls me in, subject matter expert on manufacturing, supply chain, that kind of deal, and 30 under 30 logistics. I'd also be on this panel actually talk about the youth side too.
Right. Great. Thank you for sharing about yourself and your work. I would like to ask you one important question.
Okay.
That is, what role can technology play in closing these divides that we have in the development of global development? And how do we prevent it from creating new ones?
Sure. So I think there's a more holistic view to a lot of the technology. And again, I'm supply chain manufacturing side, so my perspective is probably going to become from an area that's focused on that. But if we look at things like the divide in with some of the UN projects that we have going on in these rural communities, we're providing water, solar connectivity, internet connectivity to these rural communities, and seems good on paper. That's a short term to start to connect them to the rest of the first world communities. But as you do that, you're connecting them to antiquated systems that's not truly circular. It's not full independency or sovereignty. They're still dependent on offshores like major factories and the supply chains of them to continue to receive the parts, the maintenance, or things like that. So my opinion, and the one that I like to tout, is that if we're talking about true circularity, true connectivity, and bridging the divide for circular and self-empowerment, sovereignty, and community, you need to look at the whole spectrum. And so I like the whole technology side of give them the production power as well. We need to decentralize and distribute what is presently centralized and has not been changed in relatively the past 3 to 5 decades, and start giving them the ability not just to iterate and innovate with technologies like the internet, but to actually physically create as well, and leverage what they have on hand supplies to have that connectivity on a hardware sense, not just a software one.
Right. But Sian, this technology thing is not reachable to the last mile people. And what kind of effective measure we can bring in so this technology things can go to the last mile, and so we can have this closing the divide thing from there?
Yeah.
Would you like to share?
Well, I think it goes back to what I've heard and some really great insights. I don't think you necessarily have to have big companies come in and try and impose those access points, we're not sure. And I've seen firsthand different companies that are local that are attempting to do that already. And I think when you can then support them, I think that is a very important thing. And I think at the end of the day, then, how you make that happen is through, compelling support and it really being almost from a business angle, an ROI, right, on the investment of these companies being able to be invested in. And I think then, the pitch that you can give in that kind of context is, well, not only are you helping other people, if you were empowering, these individuals through technological access, that means, and then they're able to, be, I think, able to be plugged in, tuned in, literally, pun intended, but also then very active, members of society, I think, in that context, and then help the local community as a result. And so I think that there are a lot of those factors. If you can make those, in a challenging environment now where funding is becoming increasingly harder to secure, it goes back, I think, to that storytelling and partnering with those local organizations to support them.
Yeah. Mia, would you like to?
Within technology, I feel like it's something that we need to access anywhere, but it's not somewhere that we're actually able to do in Google functions. But I feel like we're not really just like you say, we don't really need big companies to be there and funding all these local communities. But even technology that it's small, it's maybe talk about maybe processing data, for example, provide data for research in small communities, small universities, also a good solution to kind of bridge the gap for understanding and knowledge about SDG in general. Or for example, we can also have the ethics AI we already have nowadays. We need to actually use AI in terms of maybe using it to create education or oh God, sorry.
No worries.
It's creating education, raising awareness for girls who never able to have understanding about their own rights. We can actually use those to maybe let them learn about some knowledge, some basic knowledge we have in nowadays. So.
Yeah. Marina?
Absolutely. I think with technology and access to it in general, we need to go back to the basics. There's a lot of communities that don't have access to stable electricity. There's some communities that get electricity cut off of them, I want to say for 2 to 4 hours per day for many reasons, from heat to avoid fires. So we need to go back. We need to take a few steps back to realize that there's some essentials that are missing from these communities. And then we also need to touch on essentially the importance of teaching folks how to use this technology.
Yeah.
A lot of people have access to Wi-Fi, have access to smartphones, have access to all these digital tools, but they're not using it. I want to say they're not using it to its full extent. So we need to be able to bridge the knowledge gap there too, and bring information in the language of the folks in this community. What do they need? Meet them where they're at, and then build from there. Not expect them to come to us. Okay, great, we're setting these standards, we're doing all this great stuff with technology, but it's gonna be too difficult for them to fully comprehend if they're coming to get this fully developed thing, and the most they're using their phone is to kind of search up a certain recipe or look up a math problem. So, but besides that, the electricity, I think we really need to focus on figuring out a solution to getting the reliable basics in these communities firsthand.
Yeah, basic things gap is big, especially when it comes to global north and global south. The developing countries still having basic needs to be fulfilled. Especially this electricity is the big stuff, and even people say world is growing, having big technology coming up, but it's not reaching to the last person of this universe. So it's very difficult to get in. But then what kind of solutions we can bring into this can reach to the people?
Sure. In my opinion, at least for the topic of, again, circularity, I think that missing piece is kind of the production side, because again, even if we still deploy the local solutions like proper electricity production and the solar aspect and the water filtration and the internet connectivity, you still lock them into supply. And that supply, because they're the most disconnected from it, they pay the most. So I am a big fan of just, put your money where your mouth is. That's why I do the work I do, is trying to provide decentralized production. Give a solution that can do your end-to-end production. And so I like supporting, both actively participating companies that either shrink the production line down to something that's manageable and provide that economic opportunity into those areas, or just even kind of factory in a box style solutions like we do to provide them the ability to leverage the resources and even the waste they have on hand to produce products, to not just maintain those systems and continue that connectivity without forcing them to pay the most for basic sovereignty, but also then using that to, give them economic opportunity they wouldn't have unless they were, right next to Shenzhen, for example. So I like, my opinion, the technology that helped bridge that gap for the one that I like to focus on is, decentralized manufacturing solutions. Decentralized manufacturing solutions.
But the economic gap is big, Mia, right? So what kind of solutions from economics we can bring in so we can have a good amount of production in that areas?
It's actually a very, very tough question. So I feel like for economics, we actually focusing on like how much like profit could be. But the thing is like we also counting on like GDP, for example. But the thing is like these like GDP right here, they only like able to like seeing the monetized value of it, but we never actually like able to like seeing like the ignorance of like, for example, like unpaid labor of like youth of women, or like unpaid labor of like even like caretakers of every single element like in the industry. So I feel like for example, like I think the solution here is also because of like focusing on like maybe care work is equal to infrastructure, or like maybe like climate finance, like thinking about that, or even like intergenerational equity. Like for example, like the principle, like not like political slogan. So I feel like it's also because like we also need to decide on like who is also able to be making in this kind of economics like decision, like the global south or the global north, like not just like a wealthy nation. Because like I feel like in my experience of going to any of these conferences is that like the power of the countries who's like developed, that it's like have more power to like deciding like who the money is going into, like or like going to like this kind of big organization like WHO, World Bank, all that. But the thing is like we also need to like put all the money back to like localized community as well. Like they because like I feel like they are not considering only the profit, but also caring about like the volunteers or like the other like more excluded for the community. So.
Right. I mean, this type of things we can see mostly when people have the education in mostly the urban part and not having the good amount of quality education in the rural part, and then the gap is day by day, and it's even the generational gap in the communities. But there are some solutions also coming up, like this gap we are closing the divide and making some change. Do we have any examples about this? Like you can give us any example that is making a good amount of change on the ground?
Yeah, I'm fortunate to serve on the global steering council for the UNESCO Global Youth Committee. So, appreciate your involvement there. I was fortunate a few weeks ago to be part of a panel reviewing a lot of different projects and helping to give my opinion at least on which ones I think were worthy of grants and support from UNESCO in funding some of these projects. And I think is a broader kind of theme and a kind of context of doing this work. I think that goes back to empowering people at the local level, but empowering then organizations to create skill building jobs, right? I think that we're seeing a big kind of shift in that here in the United States and around the world towards a big new focus on skill building versus just particularly going to the university. And so I think then when you're able to build on that and you're able to say, okay, a local community, for example, one of the grants I reviewed, I am looking to have solar panels installed. Okay, well, this grant would then allow a company to then go out and hire several individuals that are able to do that on the ground. I think that's a wonderful example. Or as we were talking about, a local university wants to have a information resource hub. Okay, well, then we're able to empower the folks with this grant money to go and actually develop it and build it in accordance with their needs. And I think that when you can do those things, of course, the grant does not, close the gap on everybody. but I think it does a good job at both employing people in the moment, which is wonderful for the economic side and I think prosperity, but then also then has a lot of long-term effects.
Yeah. Do you have any such example again that closing the divide and
Of a
making
youth-led organization, absolutely. I'd genuinely like to speak on the NGO that I used to work for, because when its founder, Mrs. Noreen Riyadh, founded the organization, she was a youth. And she went and saw the communities and felt that her vision, she put her actions into her words into actions. And that's why I want to shed light on this organization, because it shows us when we can do that, this is what our future can look like when we commit to doing something about what we believe in. And her vision was every child deserves dignity and opportunity. So she founded Coptic Orphans. And since then, it's helped over 100,000 Egyptian orphans to grow and enter society successfully. The program within the organization that I want to shed the light on is called the 21 Trip, which the name comes from the 21 martyrs of Libya, the 21 Christian men that were beheaded by ISIS on a beach in Libya. It brings youth volunteers from around the world to teach English in underserved communities in Egypt. And I was fortunate enough a couple years ago when I was in Egypt to participate in a program very similar to this, led by a local group there. And so I got to see how impactful this little initiative can be in the long run. So it was founded by youth, and it's empowering youth to come back and do the same thing, while empowering younger people to grow. And it's this beautiful cycle. And from the background, you see it as a educational initiative, but within it kind of goes deeper. You're bridging gaps culturally, the education gap, of course, and it's bringing different perspectives, because a lot of the times after I connect with the youth that were participants of this program, they tell me like the children that they serve changed their lives. Yeah. And it's really beautiful, this circular movement that she was able to create as a youth and now as a full-on adult. It's really impressive, and it's inspiring, because it shows us that when we commit to our words and we turn it into action, that's the product.
Yeah, I mean, these are the great examples that we have, even if this gap is raising, but we are trying to make solutions on it. Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you so much for sharing. I would like to come to you and ask you a very, very important questions about systematic change, which is needed at global level, right? Mm-hmm. And which can create more equitable economic playing field. Yeah. So what sort of your thoughts on it?
Sure. So probably going to be the trend here, talking back on a supplier production side again, because I do think it's something that's very overlooked. I mean, the machinery that makes everything's production has not really changed in the past 3 to 5 decades. And the reason that we have so much as a global populace dependency on certain factories is because they've had the opportunity to just amass the same machines over and over and over those several decade periods. So if a new community is trying to get anywhere cost competitive to the major offshore players, they have to spend in less than 1 decade what the offshore did, unless there is radical change in the actual system of where you're doing it, how you're doing it, and shifting that production method. And so, one of the big things we spoke about, like at COP and last UNGA as well, is that there needs to be that shift, which is like we're talking about the decentralized production methods, things like that, different options to locally produce, and something that can actually innovate in that sector, because that sector and the machines in it is very much one machine does one function and one material, and based on your budget, there's a limited set of OEMs you can actually get that machine from. And so when it doesn't innovate, when you can go to a trade show and see these things shut down, set fire, cause issues because you have no other option other than that OEM, there needs to be innovation support for the companies that are trying to do change in it, because when the energy industry, yes, it's the most pollutive, it's 34% of GPG. Manufacturing and supply chain, to switch around depending on what study you read, are second and third, and collectively actually make up more than energy production's emissions and output, and are so much less saturated, not just for capital solutions, but even for innovation and the people in it, because there's less support for it. So the system change that I think needs to be done is not just for manufacturing or supply chain, but also just a general focus, not just focusing on problem number 1, but problems 2 and 3, because if we're talking about ROI, if we're talking about basically impact per dollar, you're going to get more of it in the sectors that aren't saturated at all right now than the ones that have a lot of solutions and people looking forward to it, which is great, but we need to spread that out a bit, not just condense it into the biggest one. And you are going to have, in my opinion, the quicker route to lower percentile global emissions in doing so, and plays into the whole humanitarian aspect of decentralizing, providing true circularity and sovereignty. Make that a solution that can be for deployed. Make that something that can be put in the hands of the people that need it most, those communities, those businesses, those rural areas, so they're not playing into fragile supply that we've only seen worsen. And now it's publicly known of how fragile it is between items like the pandemic, the current recession, the supply chain crisis, the chip shortage, or even items like the new presidency that shifted where we're trying to get a lot of these options and production. And well, the system needs to be changed, as in my opinion, that production side. So
Yeah, I would like to come to you and see, what kind of sort of systematic change we can bring with your experience and perspective, so it can support the divide and closing this divide.
So I see like as a systematic change. I'm a student, so I'm not able to answer that question yet. But I was thinking about why is the problem of our generation right now is that we have all these amazing organizations, all these youth-led organizations, all of this program that help the locals. But the thing is why is it always having these NGOs born every single day, but they never actually have an impact or maybe even get a recognition that they needed to. And I feel it's also because most of the time businesses, they all focuses on generating profit as well as I said before, that GDP, and I feel they will not want to take the opportunity cost they got to investing in these local organizations and make it it's maybe a long-term impact. They only see it as a short-term thing. So I feel maybe in terms of systematic change, maybe if they can shift in their mindset of maybe if they is focusing on what if these will having these long-term solutions for an SDGs that it's in a certain country, or maybe the solutions actually gonna give them maybe one day long-term solution will be gender pay gap will be less, or all that, instead of focusing on just the profit itself, or how you're gonna take a return in the short term, or just have money base. So that's what I'm thinking of. So.
Right. Would you like to put more light on it?
Yeah, I've been fortunate, beyond some work with the UN and UNESCO, and then, with the State Department of the World Expo, I was a congressional staff for a few years ago, so I've been able to see a few angles of it. I agree there is a lot of barriers and roadblocks. It's a very convoluted, system, I think, that we live in that can make it very challenging to implement change. And so I think that creative thinking is always a good thing. And as we've all talked about a lot of creative solutions, a lot of things that are explored, but don't always really get that kind of recognition. And so one thing I've been fortunate to do over the last year, I've co-chaired a council of young people around the world called the Pentland Collective, and they advise a major fashion company, Pentland Brands. They have a lot of fashion brands like Speedo and some other big global names. And the focus of that has been in corporate social responsibility. What is the role of corporation? Because as you mentioned, the number one role is to advance, revenue and shareholder involvement, which is just how they all focus. But at the same time, then what is the value of being a good corporate partner, and then how does that then in turn really to further impact society? And so in that, there has been great integration now in some of the focuses of the company on the SDGs, in workplace environments, but more specifically then how they are engaging local communities through sustainable practices. And so I think that is an innovative way. I've seen more and more over the last maybe 2 years or 3 years, this focus on advisory boards really coming to light. You see more and more of them coming. Not all of them probably are as effective as they could be, but I think if you take that kind of model, there are clear goals you want to have at the onset of, okay, by the end of this term, by the end of this year, 2-year term, whatever it may be, you have these actionable goals investment, of SDG alignment. I think that's a big step, and there's a lot of potential.
Yeah. Marina?
Yes, thank you. Very, very nice. Thank you so much for sharing that. I wonder what would happen if we encouraged private businesses to invest in these local communities. My concern is that sometimes we're too reliant on outside factors to come step in, and we, as an outside actor participating in an NGO in the past or starting one, it's hard to save everyone, and it's hard to make sure that your work is touching every single person it needs, especially in these communities where honestly a lot of them are disconnected. So finding the folks that need the help sometimes is kind of difficult. So if we were to get the private businesses to invest in local communities, I think it would build jobs. It will support the families. It will create some long-term growth alongside the assistance that the outside factors are helping. I also believe that sometimes when we first have an idea, we get really excited and go for it. And the passion and the excitement is what drives it. But sometimes services kind of go like really, really good. We're starting out really strong, but the second we lose that momentum, it kind of crashes and it's kind of given up. And I wonder if there's a discrepancy there. I think we should also be holding global institutions to be transparent and to have them be held accountable for everything, and to be sure that resources are actually reaching the folks that need them most. Because the goal should always to have countries move towards becoming self-reliant. Because I think that is the end goal. Essentially, I think we're all in agreement is to support these communities and get them standing on their own 2 feet. So I think if we were to get folks alongside the outside factors, but investment in the businesses, investing in these local communities is the strong suit there.
That's great. It's time to online audience there across 189 countries who are joining us. Do you have any questions to our panelists? Kindly post in your chat box so we can take one by one. There is.
That's cool.
Yeah.
There's a chat box.
Yeah, here's an ad. Excellent.
There must be some questions upstairs.
I think there's a.
Yeah. Okay, maybe we can, once we get some online questions, still, I do have questions to all of you, especially the UN thing and the things like the World Bank and lots of economic support organizations out there and work and say that we are impacting millions and billions peoples on the globe. But do you really think that is reaching to the last mile people? Would you like to share on that?
I don't believe so. Admittedly, as someone that's worked with some of these larger corporations, and communities end up being built into some of these larger international groups and organizations, a lot of it's almost for PR, or it's almost for showing that they have the philanthropy to do so, while in the reality they don't care much about other than the bottom line margin, as some of the other panelists have touched on here. In the sense that, look at how many, both from the actual environmental, sustainable aspect, but even other SDGs are trying to hit. Look at how many of these organizations say, we're going to hit X metric by X year. And then by X year, they hope it's kind of fizzled out because they set a goal that's years in advance. and they hope you kind of forget about it. So they set another goal even further and further ahead. And there's many times that those goals just are not met because, again, in my opinion, I think some of it is initially that either publicity play or the solutions that, as they've looked into that factor after they've made that commitment, don't have that immediate return. It is hard to make sustainability profitable in a lot of ways. And unless there is that immediate kind of shorter, less than 5-year term, it's hard to convince a lot of folks to jump on. And as a result, because we don't see the commitments that are being said years later actually met, and a lot of the things the general public just assumes that happened, I don't think that the resulting tech, the resulting support, whatever the end result of that commitment and project was, ends up trickling down to the bottom person. And I do think, especially not just from the private side, especially the governmental side, there needs to be a better shift for that because I think a lot of governments operate similarly. I've heard the quote plenty of times that, especially like the U.S. governmental budget makes the billionaires, full asset portfolios quail in comparison. And when there's those levels of assets to move, and when there's those levels of assets that are even hard to allocate, look at how our own government's failing to actually place where 1/3 of our total taxpayer budgets are even going. If you don't know where that's going, cut that off and put it towards something more productive, in my opinion, because you will see it trickle down. I think some of the local solutions where you have a lot of, especially the smaller companies, really hands-on out in the field, I think those are reaching the end people, but it's hard for them to help everyone, and it does need to be a more focused communal effort, and someone needs to crack down if someone doesn't meet the expectation they set.
Yeah. Marina?
I would have to agree to a certain extent that the larger scale of things shows like, yes, we want to achieve this and that, and it's words are easy, but it's putting things into action is where it kind of gets a little muddy and messy. I agree. The action that's actually being happening, that's actually making the work happen, is happening by the folks, the smaller groups that we don't know much about, the locally led initiatives within the communities. That's where they're reaching folks. And if we, like I said, my strong advocacy is empowering from within, because I got to see it. I worked with a development NGO within Egypt that is going into the homes of people that don't have infrastructure and making sure infrastructure happens for these families, making sure the children are enrolled in schools. But on a larger grand scale level, on a larger stage, these NGOs, these groups, these initiatives that are being done by a few youth in one area, we don't really know much about it until you go in there and see. Like, for example, I was speaking with someone in my community here in DC. When he was in Egypt, because I'm Egyptian, when he was in Egypt, he realized that his community lacked a database of all of the different blood types within the community. Therefore, when someone was going into the hospital, they didn't know how to help them, who had what blood type to save this person in case of an emergency. So him and his group of friends actually started this initiative, but nobody knows about it. But now it's grown so much. I think if we really focus in on what these people are doing, these are the people that are reaching. Right. These are the ones that are going to finding that last person that needs some sort of assistance. I think that's where we need to empower the local communities.
Yeah. Sian?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that's been said. I found in my work that usually people are not moved by things or really concerned unless it impacts them directly. And as challenging as some of these things might be around the world, a mindset that I've run into many times as well, that's not really going on where I'm at, so I'm not really concerned about it. It should not be a problem. And, what's interesting, I was fortunate for a couple of years, I worked with an organization called the Holt Prize. They do a lot to help, startups and organizations working to make a difference. At the end, there's a big pitch competition. One organization will win $1 million prize to advance their work. But in that process, you need all of these organizations from around the world that, again, as you've mentioned, we've talked a lot about, are very in touch with what's going on. And I think then I've followed a few of those organizations, even if they don't get the grand prize, they, of course, continue in their work. And, moving into the partnership phase is very important, right? They've already got the kind of insight, on the ground knowledge, that talent, how do they work with other organizations, again, so that it's mutually beneficial and you can advance the cause. And again, I think that, things of shared prosperity and success, although it may not, impact people's day to day if they don't think it's a priority, I still think it's important. I think, when you can be a good ally, a good partner, that just helps create a better world for everyone. I think in those broad themes, that's an important viewpoint for it.
Yeah. Nia?
So I actually think I agree with all the panels here because I feel like as a person, I was also going to a lot of conferences, so kind of meeting a lot of staff members, and in a way, there's some form of like we're saying how for example, they really not actually put to the effort of put it onto the action. They're always indecisive in their own actions. And they actually have all the agenda, 2030 agenda, all the SDGs, but even the SDG 5, which is equality, most of the countries not able to reach that.
Yeah.
Put all these very long term agenda that we have said that it's to whole 20 years and it's never able to achieve that as well. So in a way they don't really put in this kind of effort to put these SDGs into the local action, but it's always feel like the local organization is the one who try to go into these kind of conferences, create connections, to able to be step up and have some influence in the community, but not the UN or any other big nation try to put it into open opportunity for them to step up and able to have recognition itself. So in a way the system itself it's not fully able to implementing into these small community members of every single marginal community. Because for me right now, I'm in Unira and it's a youth-led initiative to pushing up HC10. And right now we're just still newly launching, we're still in the process of blending the system. And I feel the system right now is looking maybe it works because firstly we have this grassroots level national youth chapters. I mean UN also have chapters each country Vietnam, America, all that, but in a way they don't really do that much connection with the headquarters. So for us we also try to make more action to the locals, for example, maybe our school workshops, an awareness campaign, and document testimonies of exclusions. And then at the regional level, we also have this kind of council where we will adapt initiative to the local context and in the context of the regions and ensuring about cultural sensitivity or maybe mentoring national leaders. And we also extend up into a global level where we're able to convene anti-racism summits, publish annual report about how people can able to feel inclusive in the community, or submit youth-led policy proposal to the UN or other international levels organizations. And we also have capacity development program where we also take care of the member of ourselves and make sure they also knowing what they're doing and also supporting it mentally as well. So in a way I feel that program may works because it's actually taking care of each member of organizations or each member of every single community itself. So in a way I need to maybe reconstruct a little bit about these kind of big organization to actually focusing on the people itself and actually open opportunities for the locals, for the smaller organizations to have a voice, but not them fighting up to this ladder of prosperity to be up there and have recognitions.
Right. I mean, we got a few questions. Let me just go there and check. And how can advocacy ensure rights are truly protected, not just recognized? Anyone of you want to share thoughts on this question?
Well, I think it starts with the recognition piece. I think that is built into it. And I think then in terms of ensuring rights are protected, that really comes in through governmental partners. And I think that comes back to what we've been talking about. I think that there are unique and innovative ways to advocacy that are important. I think there are always evolving ways to do that. We live in a very unique time today in terms of how advocacy works, but I think that is very, very important, working with government partners. And I've at least personally found, in my work, when you're talking about, equal rights and how to make sure that stuff is protected, individual storytelling is very, very important. That and data-driven kind of action, because I think then it really helps to compel leaders. Because otherwise, a lot of times leaders and governmental stakeholders are presented with a slew of different things all at one time. And so I think that in order to make sure that's the forefront, using those skills are a great way, again, for the rights to be recognized, but also protected.
Yeah. Ethan, you want to share?
I have a less positive opinion on this because I think it is societal change, and I think that is a much longer and much tougher problem to do. It's not overnight. I think it's something that, yes, we can see a policy go through, but you won't see that actively recognized in the community. And there's a lot of communities that will see new policy or see new change and not immediately accept it, whether that's local in the States, whether it's international. I think that the first approach to really try to solve that and make sure that's there is support of the people, and then shift that into action shift that into political action instead of political action, hoping that's trickled down to the people. But then again, if it's far enough along that these rights are being fully doctrined within their governments, then hopefully that is enough communal support from the people to do that. But if it's a government enforcing one thing and then it goes down to the people the other way around, that's going to be a lot harder to transition in. But because we have seen injustice and other things that aren't recognized in a lot of these communities, even though the government and other policy has already ensured that sometimes decades ago. And so I think it's social change that's there, and I'm more manufacturing change. So that's a little out of my realm, but at least it's my opinion.
Yeah, Marina?
Honestly, I think it starts with every single one of us. It starts with us within our friend groups, starts us within our communities, what we're doing over the weekend, and recognizing these patterns. And like we clearly established, recognizing is when we have to recognize it first before we ensure that the right is actually being truly protected.
Right. Mia?
I think I totally agree with you actually, because I feel like it's all about individuals and recognition first. And then the thing is to be protected, we actually have to sometimes base on governments. But the thing is even if you try to speak to the government about try recognizing, it's very for sure the government cannot help, because they also connect with private sector, public sectors and all that. It's not help after one night. It's also need to be a long lasting advocacy of protesting or something, for example, to actually able to see the result. But in a way, it's also very difficult to think about what's a healthy advocacy way to actually put it back to the government. So I feel maybe we can advocate in terms of how we're doing it, the how of here is the question. Maybe we can proposal documentations, all the report and send to them, and maybe they're actually looking over if they actually care. But I feel if we just protesting every day and they will actually not care about it, then we'll never able to have a result needed.
Right. Maybe we can have one more questions from online audience. Can you please if not, then we can have the last question for today's panel, and that is more important, systematic change or status quo development model. There are lots of status quo we can see in different parts of the world. People keep it for their, earning things, or maybe for their their own development, but not thinking about the community development or community support, and that gap is more into this current situation. Maybe the economic inequalities, not giving the good quality of educations, and then it is raising bad day. So what kind of things we can have bring systematic change or status quo development model? Would you like to share, Marina, on that?
Sure. I'm gonna go back to like my main thing, and that is to really empower the communities within their countries. Within the country needs to empower their communities from within. I believe that when nations are able to provide for their citizens, therefore they're able to strengthen their economies, and that leads to greater prosperity and stability for everyone all around. And I think that's one thing that everyone can agree on. That is my 2 cents on that.
Great. Would you like to share?
Yeah, well, thanks for having us today. This is really nice. I was fortunate. I'm no expert, I don't think, on any of this stuff, but what really got me into it was a couple of years ago in college. I participated in a program called the Millennium Campus Network. They have an annual Millennium Fellowship program where they engage students on practicing the SDGs. Before this, I had no idea what the SDGs were, but I got into this work and I met all these people from all over the world working on their own projects to try and focus on the SDGs. And for me, growing up locally, I thought SDG 11 of sustainable cities and communities seemed kind of relevant. And so I created a project to have toolkits made up for, supplies like a pencil sharpener, a ruler, all though made of sustainable material that could be reused by students. And it's a nice project. It got some students engaged and they were excited. But as that fellowship came to a close, all these people I knew, a lot of my friends and other people, totally dismissed the project. Thought it was kind of a waste of time and so invaluable in making change. And it got me very upset. I was thinking, well, is that a valid sentiment? And is that, a real problem? And I wrote an op-ed in my local paper talking about the power I thought there was in small steps leading to big change when you can localize it and empower people to make a difference. And ever since, that's kind of been my focus here. And I think that's a big, big thing. And although you might not always have the funding, the resources, there are tools in front of you. I think for almost every individual, there are tools out there where you can really drive change. And it might not be engagement that gets millions and millions, but it's a start, and it is a launch pad, and it takes time.
Yeah.
So I feel like for me, status quo is something that's always persistent. It's in this kind of mentality that we have for each member of our country, for example. It's like a culture stigmatization, for example. And I feel like to able to persist against that, or maybe break through the status quo, is that we actually need to changing our mindset of our people, from small steps. For example, because in my country in Vietnam, we have a lot of cultures, barriers and stigmatization. For example, of how women still need to be cooking, do all of that, midwives and stuff. And I feel to able to change that, we need to maybe changing from the local small kids, for example, small kids in school communities to learn that this is not the way life works, and this is how we should be. We have our opinion, and we have our decision on how we want to live as a woman, and we have to maybe adapting this kind of solution into small schools, maybe in primary school to level up, so that at least we can change the people mindset slowly, but not through maybe it's not all the time over one night, but it's still change slowly to able to change this kind of barrier that we have in our countries.
Yeah. Would you have?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think both systems and status quo have such a diverse set of definitions for a variety of different industries, applications, and across all different SDGs. So to speak on the one that I am the expert on a bit is, I think technology is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to do so. That can come in a lot of different forms, but to give a real world example, I think there's major shifts in education, especially later stage education. And even in my own upbringing, kind of doing what I have and starting the companies I have at the ages I have as well. And I did so without this formal, traditional, late-stage educational background. In doing so, I even in the companies I run today, for example, I'm not even looking at where you went to university or what you did in university as well these days. In my opinion, one shows me that you've theoretically learned a concept. And I think with technology, where I've gotten my origins, where I see a lot of new communities building their origins, if you start to give them that community, there is a natural curiosity, there's a hunger, there's an interest in it, and they're going to, as I did getting into even the industry, I did rip it apart, build it back up together, make it better, and I'm going to hire the person that's hacked up a crazy machine out of the garage. It's not just showing me you understand the concept around it, but you can actually apply it. And then I'm going to take that over the person that was supposedly educated for it in a higher institution and not applied it as much. I think there's support in doing so, but I think that one of the quickest, dirtiest hands-on ways to do so, especially in an age and era where the traditional educational pathways are crumbling a bit, those requirements, and you can get employed by the CIA and high-tier government positions now, and those requirements have now been dropped. I think there's an opportunity now especially with the resources behind as we connect everyone to internet connectivity and things like that, to hungrily self-educate, learn. And if we provide these technologies to the communities that have that time, interest, and base level connectivity, we're seeing rural areas in, for example, like Kenya, become major software powers because they got computers and they're hungry behind it. They have the time, they want to learn, they want to jump into it. And I would love to provide more of that kind of technology to communities, where it's physical, whether it's software, whether it's anything else, and see people rip them apart, build them better, and see them bring that into business, into everywhere else, because that's what's going to drive the next wave of jobs. That's what's going to drive technological literacy faster than the traditional routes, in my opinion.
Great, thank you so much everyone here, and it was a great having conversation about the closing the divide. And yeah, we are bridging the gap. We are trying from our end, and even the online audience also doing the same. Thank you so much for joining us. See you soon again. Thank you.